Gerald straightened his tie and tried to look sympathetic. "I know this might come as a surprise," he said, "but Tyler brings fresh perspectives, new energy." "Sure," I replied. "You understand, right? It's nothing personal." I studied him for a long moment. Gerald was 52, soft around the middle, his thinning hair combed carefully to hide the bald spots. He'd inherited his position when his father-in-law retired. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I understand perfectly," I said. He let out a breath, relieved. "Good. I knew you'd be professional about this. That's why you're such a valuable team member." Valuable. Not valuable enough for the promotion I'd earned, but valuable enough to train his nephew and smile about it. I walked back to my desk and sat down. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people solving problems. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen for a full minute before I began typing. I'd started at Ravens Park Ventures in March of 2019, right after my divorce. I needed a fresh start, and manufacturing logistics seemed solid. Boring work, but reliable, with good pay and peaceful nights. The company specialized in distributing industrial equipment across the Southwest. Gerald had hired me himself, shaking my hand and saying they needed someone with my experience. I'd spent 12 years at my previous company before budget cuts wiped out my position. Starting over at 44 hadn't been easy, but Gerald had made it sound like an opportunity. "We're growing fast," he told me during the interview. "Plenty of room for advancement for the right people." I became one of the right people. I worked weekends when shipments got delayed, stayed late when customers had emergencies, built strong relationships with suppliers from Phoenix to Houston. My performance reviews were flawless. Gerald always smiled, always promised that bigger things were on the horizon. "Your management material, Anthony," he'd say. "You just need to be patient." And I was patient. Patient to a fault that my daughter, Sophia, visited every other weekend. She was 16 now, old enough to notice when her dad looked tired. Sometimes she'd catch me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, laptop open, still answering work emails. "Dad, it's the weekend," she'd say. "Just catching up?" I'd tell her. "Building something good here." She'd roll her eyes, but she understood. Her mom had remarried a lawyer, a man with reasonable hours who coached Little League and made time for family dinners. I was the dad who worked too much, but always sent birthday money on time and never missed a school play. The first crack appeared 6 months ago, when Gerald casually mentioned that his nephew might be joining the company. "Smart kid," he said. "Just graduated from the University of Texas. Business degree." I nodded, thinking nothing of it. Companies hired recent grads all the time, usually for entry-level roles where they could learn the ropes. But Tyler didn't start at the ground. He started in the office next to Gerald's, with a title operations specialist and a salary I could only guess at. Gerald introduced him around like visiting royalty. "Tyler's going to observe our processes," Gerald announced. "Learn how we do things." And so he did, by sitting in on my client calls, scribbling notes while I explained vendor negotiations, asking questions that made it clear he didn't understand the basics. Still, he was eager. I'd give him that. And polite. He said yes, sir, and thank you like his mother had raised him right. So I trained him, because that's what you do. You help a new guy, even when the new guy's last name is Patterson, even when his uncle signs your paychecks, even when you start to suspect exactly where this is headed. The moment of truth came 3 weeks ago, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd stayed late to finish quarterly reports. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. On my way to break room for coffee, I heard voices coming from Gerald's office. His door was cracked open, and the hallway carried sound better than people realized. "The board's going to ask questions," Gerald was saying. "Tyler's only been here 2 months." Another voice, deeper, older, responded. I recognized it as James Mitchell from corporate. "You said Anthony was ready for promotion." "Anthony's solid," Gerald replied. "But Tyler's family. And he's got the degree. The board likes degrees. What about Anthony's experience?" James pressed. Gerald laughed. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. "Anthony's a good worker. Reliable. But he's not executive material. He'll keep doing what he's doing, make good money, and everything works out." I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds, listening to them plan my future. Tyler would get Henderson's position. I would train him, support him, and pretend to be grateful for the opportunity. Anthony won't cause problems, Gerald continued. He's got a daughter, alimony payments. He needs his job. He'll fall in line. That's when I walked away quietly, careful not to let my footsteps give me away. Back at my desk, I saved my work, shut down my computer, and drove home in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Gerald's words kept echoing in my head. He'll fall in line, like I was some horse being broken to saddle. Like 5 years of loyalty and hard work had earned me nothing more than the right to be grateful for scraps. I thought about Sophia, how proud she'd been when I told her about the possible promotion. My dad's going to be a director, she told her friends. Now I'd have to explain why that wasn't happening. I thought about my ex-wife, too, how she'd always said I was too passive. You let people walk over you, Anthony. Stand up for yourself for once. Maybe she had been right. The next morning, I came into work with a different mindset. I watched Tyler more carefully. I noticed how Gerald pulled him into executive meetings while keeping me buried in day-to-day operations. I saw how other managers began deferring to Tyler on decisions that should have been mine. 3 weeks later, I sat in the conference room watching Tyler accept congratulations for a job he hadn't earned. And something inside me broke. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Gerald thought I needed this job. Thought I'd fall in line because I had bills to pay and a daughter to support. He was wrong. I opened my laptop and started typing my resignation letter. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. For once in my life, I knew exactly what I was going to do. At exactly 4:30 p.m. on Friday, I submitted it. Gerald had just come back from walking Tyler through the warehouse, proudly showing him his new domain. I knocked on his door, handed him the envelope, and said, "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Gerald's face shifted through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then something close to panic. He ripped open the envelope, eyes darting across the page. "Is this a joke?" "No, sir. You can't be serious. You're leaving because Tyler got the promotion." I stayed quiet and let him fill the silence. Gerald stood up, pacing behind his desk. "Anthony, let's be reasonable here. You're upset, I get it. But walking away from 5 years of building your career? That's not smart. I've made my decision. What about your daughter? Your responsibilities?" There it was, the leverage he thought he had. The reason he believed I'd fall in line and keep quiet. "I'll manage," I said. His tone hardened. "You realize how this looks, right? Quitting because you didn't get promoted? It's unprofessional. Childish." I nodded. "I can see how you'd think that. I won't give you a good reference. You understand that? Walking out like this, leaving us hanging, no company's going to want someone who throws tantrums." Something cold settled in my stomach. 5 years of perfect performance, and now I was being dismissed as a man throwing a tantrum. 5 years of late nights and weekends, and now I was unprofessional. "That's your choice," I said evenly. Gerald sat back down and tried a softer tone. "Look, Anthony, I like you. You're good at what you do. But Tyler brings something different to the table. Youth, fresh ideas, vision." "Vision," I repeated, tasting the word. "The board wants innovation, new thinking. Tyler represents the future of this company. And what do I represent?" I asked. Gerald hesitated. "Experience. Stability. Those are valuable too. Valuable enough to train my replacement, but not valuable enough to promote." The math was clear. "I appreciate the clarification," I said. "Don't do this, Anthony. Take the weekend, think it over. Come back Monday, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." I studied him for a moment. He truly believed I would back down, that threatening my reference and questioning my professionalism would keep me in line. "I'll finish out my 2 weeks," I said. "I'll train Tyler on whatever he needs to know." Gerald's expression hardened. "You'll train him? You think Tyler needs help from someone who quits when things don't go his way? He needs to understand vendor contracts, supply chain logistics, emergency protocols. Unless you plan to figure all that out yourself," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm. That hit home. Gerald knew he didn't understand the technical side of operations. Neither did Tyler. They needed me, at least for 2 weeks. "Fine," Gerald said tightly. 2 weeks. But don't expect any favors. Don't expect me to help you land somewhere else. You're burning bridges here, Anthony. I nodded and turned to leave. Anthony, Gerald called after me. You're making a mistake. A big one. I stopped at the door. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Walking back to my desk, I felt lighter than I had in months. Most of the office was already empty for the weekend. Tyler was still at his desk, staring at organizational charts like they held the secrets of the universe. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began documenting everything he would need to know: vendor contacts, emergency procedures, troubleshooting guides. Not because Gerald asked me to, but because the people who relied on our supply chains deserved better than chaos. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter. Dad, can we get dinner tomorrow? I want to hear about your week. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. I've got news to share. For once, it was good news. News about finally standing up for myself. Walking away from people who didn't value what I brought to the table. Gerald thought he was punishing me, but he had no idea what he had just set in motion. Monday morning, I arrived early, as always, and found Tyler already at his desk, looking overwhelmed. 3 monitors glowed with spreadsheets and frantic notes from vendors. Morning, Tyler, I said. How's the transition going? He looked up, relief washing over his face. Anthony, thank God. I've been here since 6, trying to figure out the Morrison Industries account. Their procurement manager is threatening to cancel if we don't fix some shipping issue by noon. Morrison Industries, our biggest client, $2 million a year. I personally managed that account for 4 years. What's the issue? I asked. Something about delayed titanium brackets from our supplier in Tucson. But I can't figure out which supplier. They all look the same. Their emails are confusing. I glanced at his screen. He was buried in the wrong contracts, chasing irrelevant details. He was drowning. Tyler, I said carefully, did Gerald brief you on the Morrison account? He said you'd handle the transition, but then he mentioned your situation. So I thought maybe I should figure out myself. Show initiative. My situation. That's what they were calling it now. I spent the next 3 hours walking him through the Morrison relationship. Explained their just-in-time delivery system. Showed him the backup supplier network I'd spent years building. Helped him see how one small delay could snowball into a canceled contract. This is insanely complex, Tyler admitted once the crisis was resolved. How do you keep track of all this? Experience, I said, and good documentation. Could you show me your documentation system? That's when it hit me. Gerald hadn't just promoted Tyler without preparation. He'd promoted him without even understanding what the job required. Tyler wasn't incompetent. He was simply unprepared. The scope of operations was far beyond what he'd been led to expect. At lunch, I started making calls. Old contacts, industry partners. Word was already spreading about changes at Ravens Park. Some were worried about stability. Others saw opportunities. Anthony, said Janet Morrison, the procurement manager who had threatened to cancel that morning, I heard rumors about management changes. Please tell me you're still handling our account for the next 2 weeks. Yes, I told her. But after that, Tyler Patterson will be your primary contact. Silence filled the line. Patterson, as in Gerald Patterson's nephew. Jesus, Anthony, one of my biggest clients, said. That kid called me this morning asking questions that made no sense. I thought he was new to the team, not replacing you. He's eager, sure, but I don't have time to babysit Ravens Park management. We've got production schedules to meet. If your company can't provide competent service, we'll find someone who can. That conversation repeated itself 4 times with 4 different major clients. By the end of the day, I knew exactly what would happen after I left. Tyler would struggle. Clients would lose patience. Gerald would try to micromanage operations he didn't understand. Within 6 months, the entire regional division would start bleeding accounts. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Tuesday morning, Gerald called me into his office. He looked worn out, the kind of tired that comes from watching the foundation start to crack. Anthony, he said carefully, maybe we were hasty. There's room for both you and Tyler in management. You could be associate director. Tyler would handle strategy. You'd manage the technical side. Associate director, a made-up title that meant doing the same job for the same pay, while pretending Tyler was my boss. That's generous, I told him, but I'll stick with my original decision. Gerald's expression hardened. You're going to regret this, Anthony. I promise you that. Maybe, but I was done living in fear of Gerald's promises. By Wednesday, I already had 3 job interviews scheduled. I'd spent 5 years building relationships across the Southwest supply chain. Those connections weren't Raven's Parks, they were mine. Thursday morning, Silver Links Energy, Austin. David Harrison, regional manager, shook my hand with a grin. I heard you might be available, he said. Word travels fast. It does when someone like you hits the market, especially with your client relationships. David slid an offer across the table, regional operations director. The same title Gerald had handed Tyler, except this one came with 30% higher pay, stronger benefits, and, most importantly, the request to bring my client network with me. No non-compete, no barriers, just loyalty earned over years of service. I accepted. Friday afternoon, Gerald summoned me again. Tyler sat in the corner, looking miserable. I hear you're interviewing with competitors, Gerald said, his face red. That's a conflict of interest. Corporate espionage. I haven't shared a single piece of proprietary information, I said evenly. Your client relationships are proprietary. Gerald snapped. No, I corrected. They're personal. I built them. They trust me, not your letterhead. Gerald's voice dropped to a threat. Walk out that door with our clients, and I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I stood. Gerald, I gave you 5 years. Perfect reviews. 60-hour weeks. I trained your nephew for the job you promised me. I've been nothing but professional. I'm finishing my notice, then I'm moving on. What happens after depends on how you handle the transition. Gerald glared. Tyler stayed silent. I spent my last week documenting everything for Tyler. Not because Gerald deserved it, but because Tyler was a 23-year-old kid thrown into a role he couldn't manage. On my final day, I turned in my badge. Gerald's last words. This isn't over. For me, it is. And I walked out. 6 months later, David slid a magazine across his desk with a grin. The headline, Ravens Park Ventures Regional Division Hemorrhages Clients. Family drama blamed. Morrison Industries gone. Copperfield Manufacturing gone. Southwest revenue down 60%. The board had launched an internal investigation. Gerald Patterson, terminated. Nepotism scandal. Tyler, resigned back in graduate school. 3 of their remaining clients already reached out to us, David said. They want you handling their accounts. I folded the magazine. I feel bad for Tyler. He was thrown into something he wasn't ready for. Tyler will be fine, David shrugged. He's young. Gerald, on the other hand, hard to pity a man who threw away good people to promote family. 1 year later, Tucson, a diner by the airport. Tyler Patterson sat in a corner booth, a textbook open in front of him. Supply chain management. He looked older, more serious. He glanced up as I approached. Anthony? What are you doing here? Business trip, I said. Mind if I join you? He gestured to the seat across from him. For the first time, I didn't see my replacement. I saw a kid who had been used as a pawn in his uncle's game. Someone who, like me, was finally learning how to build something of his own. Back in school, Tyler explained a master's program at Arizona State, supply chain focus. He gave me a sheepish smile. Figured I should actually learn what I was supposed to be doing. That's smart, I said. He hesitated, then added, I wanted to thank you for how you handled everything. You could have hung me out to dry, but you didn't. You actually tried to help me succeed. You were in an impossible situation, I told him. Uncle Gerald still blames you for everything. Says you sabotaged the company. I sipped my coffee. What do you think? Tyler closed his textbook. His voice was steady. I think I was 23 with a business degree and no real-world experience. I think my uncle gave me a job I wasn't qualified for just because I was family. And I think you spent 5 years earning a promotion that should have been yours. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that carries mutual understanding. I'm sorry about how everything went down, Tyler said finally. You deserved better. We both did, I replied. But sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. He nodded. I heard you're doing well at Silverlinks. I am. And you will too, once you're ready. When the check came, I paid for both lunches and shook his hand before leaving. He was a good kid, just caught in the wrong game with the wrong mentor. 6 months later, the news broke. Gerald Patterson filed for bankruptcy after losing his wrongful termination lawsuit against Ravens Parks Board of Directors. Tyler, on the other hand, graduated with honors and took an entry-level role at a logistics firm in Phoenix. 2 years later, he'd earned his first promotion, because this time he'd built it the right way. The nephew had learned what the uncle never understood. Respect and advancement are earned, not inherited. And me? I'd already learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's walking away and building something better.